You know, learning with the masters is one of my very favorite things about the Chamber Music Society of Fort Worth. It's an important program for us as a group, but it's an even more important program for the young people because they get to meet and learn about some of the greatest violinists, some of the greatest, we've had cellists, we've had flutists, we've had really some of the greatest musicians in the industry. And I'm so proud to introduce my very good friend, Will Fedkenheuer, here as the second violinist of the Miró String Quartet and a wonderful musician. Welcome, Will.
Oh, thank you, guys.
How are you?
Good.
So, Will, welcome back.
Thank you.
This is Will's first time at the Learning with the Masters events. And in this interview, I just really kind of want to learn more about you because we've been friends as musicians, but I think not quite enough as people. So maybe give us a little bit of background how you became a professional musician.
Yeah, well, so I grew up in Calgary, Alberta, in Canada. And I started the violin because my sister, I have an older sister, 4 years old, she started the violin. And my parents saw it was really good for her discipline and for her focus. And little Will at age 4 needed some discipline and some focus, and so I started the violin.
You know, knowing you, I'm having a real hard time believing that you were at any time not a focused professional.
It was quite something. I mean, it was spectacular. But I started in Suzuki, and then after it was sort of in the second year of that, in Canada, there's a conservatory system, and that was just happened to be on the other side of town, but there were two incredibly renowned pedagogues for violin, Dr. Lise Elson and Joan Barrett. And so my mom decided to drive us over there and audition, and I was accepted to study with Joan Barrett. And we did a lot of wonderful work together. She was a student of Gingold and Galamian, but most importantly, she introduced me to fiddle tunes. And so by the age of, it was right around 7, I actually auditioned for this group called the Calgary Fiddlers, which was a group of about 8 to 10 young violinists, fiddlers, who traveled around the world. And
would it be fair to say that Calgary is maybe Canada's answer to Texas?
Oh yeah, no, it is totally the Texas of Canada.
Perfect.
Or Texas is the Alberta of Canada. Whoever's watching.
And ironically, look at where he makes his living.
That's true, that's very true. And so I actually was wonderful. I got to travel around the world. The first trip was to Disneyland, but I went to Japan as a young fiddler, and that sort of gave me this taste of travel. And then when I always did classical music beside it, and I was always doing technique and concertos and all of that. And so when I was looking at what to do for university, I ended up actually coming down to Rice University and worked with Kathleen Winkler there, and loved that. And that, even though I had been doing chamber music my whole life, during that time, they hired Paul Katz and Martha Katz, who were the founding violist and cellist of the Cleveland Quartet. And so I had organized a quartet just to study with them. And it was during that semester where I fell deeply in love with the art of string quartet. And working with them then led me through multiple quartets. And so I actually I went to Indiana University, started a master's degree with Miriam Fried. And from there, joined the Borromeo Quartet and was a second violinist of the Borromeo Quartet, lived in Boston, taught at New England Conservatory of Music there for six and a half seasons. And then that life was very, very busy. We did on average 130 to 140 concerts a year.
Wow.
And we did about 50 to 60 residency days a year, and taught full-time at New England Conservatory. So after 6 years, I just needed a change, and that led me to retire.
Way too young to retire.
It was wonderful. And I then auditioned for a different quartet, a first violinist of the Frey Street Quartet, which lived in Utah, in this smaller town of Logan, Utah, which is just northeast of Salt Lake City, and did a lot more teaching. We did maybe 30 to 40 concerts, but did a full Beethoven cycle there to sold out concerts. And there's such a rich, diverse community there who loves music that taught me all these other rich values that came along with what I'd been doing. And after it was literally 5 or 6 years of that, Daniel Ching of the Miró Quartet called me up, and they had been looking for a violinist for a number of months. I think actually almost a year. And he was curious to see if I would ever be interested. And Daniel and his wife Sandy, who was the second violinist at the time, we all met in 1991 at the Bowdoin Summer Music Festival. And there were a number of stories there, but we had always stayed in touch. And so, yeah, I came and we played a couple things, and it felt very, very natural. And that balance, we do between 90 and 100 concerts a year, but we're more in Austin and able to create families and have a wonderful time there. So
that's wonderful. As violinists in a string quartet, obviously with this kind of a workload, how do you balance the idea of the teaching, the performing? How do you prepare for all of this?
You know, we're very articulate with our scheduling. With the quartet schedule itself, we've moved into a system where 2 years ahead of time, we're actually carving out when are dates that we'll be on tour and when are dates that we're going to be home. And we've carved out the dates so that we're home for, many of us have children, so children's birthday, spouses are other important dates, Halloween, we get a big break at Christmas time and spring break for the kids. And so we've carved that out, both to protect our personal time with our families and the people that we love there. That also gives us rehearsal time without the stress of travel and playing concerts, and then it gives us teaching time. It's meticulous though, and it's really with that art of scheduling that you learn how to balance those different parts of your life, and it is you nevertheless always run into a moment where you learn something,
Right.
And you think, oh, all right, well we'll add that to the list of things to check for the next season.
One final question. In many quartets, the violinists switch off.
Yeah.
And in the Miró, that's not the case. I'm going to assume that that's something that you're very comfortable with. Just like in the Emerson, they're very not comfortable with it.
Yeah.
But what's your feeling philosophically with certain quartets that do switch off and with Miró that does not?
You know, the way I look at it personally, and also what we've talked about in the Miró, is every quartet, just like each individual, is going to be very unique in how they build together that fine balance of what it is to be that quartet. For me personally, and I think about the role of first violin as such a very different art. And having been a first violinist, there's very few actual violinists who've played first violin through a Beethoven quartet cycle and second violin through a Beethoven quartet cycle. And the roles are so unique and special to what they need to do. For myself and for Daniel, each one of us feels very, very comfortable just focusing in on what is that art of the second violin, for example. And how does that then bond and change and adapt these relationships, not only with the other violinist, but for the violist and the cellist as well. And sometimes in rehearsal we'll switch, because that in itself is a rehearsal technique. When we get into a situation where there is only one violinist on stage, then the rule in the quartet is I get to choose whether I'd like to play that or whether I'd like to have a little vacation. But most often I actually push myself to play it, because that then re-engages me and reminds me, oh, this is that first violin role. And that only helps me to be a more effective and impactful second violinist. It's fascinating, because when I was first in the Bourne Male Quartet, I was a second violinist. And there were all of these things that Nick Kitchen, who I know you've had here, was asking and doing, and sometimes we would argue, but most of the time we both would get curious about how I could do that, or what he would be really asking me for. And then I went to be a first violinist, and it was like these light bulbs went off, like, oh, I get it. Oh, that's why he was asking for that. Well, maybe I do it a little bit differently. And now being back in that second violin role, it's fascinating, because when I first joined the Miró, it was actually, I had to focus quite a bit on playing the right part. because both of those parts were so intimate inside of my soul. And now it's more this incredible gift to be able to dance between the two and have a deep understanding of what each role is doing, and then to let the personalities and bring along the other influences as we grow together.
You know, one of the, I think the signatures of the Miró sound is that the inner voices have both incredible personality and the incredible foundation that the quartet is all about.
Wow,
So it's a really testament to you guys.
Thank you, that means a lot, and it's an important part of our philosophy as a quartet is we want the strength of individuals to be there.
Of course.
And that they're contributing to this whole, so that both the whole is more impactful and more meaningful and fulfilling as it is for the individual, and it's that mix of personalities. Like the Guarneri Quartet, you know, that mix that they really brought was very unique and special to them. And then, of course, that sound of the Cleveland or the Tokyo, who were a little more blended, and finding the places where both of those essences can be part of the life of a string quartet.
I think you guys embody all of that. Thank you so much, Will.
Thank you, Gary.
Let's go to the masterclass portion of this, and we're going to be very, very happy to introduce a young violinist to play some Bach for you. Mr. G, please.
bravo, bravo. This is, I asked him right before he performed whether you had performed this before, and this was his very first performance. So bravo on that, because there is a lot to accomplish just to get it to this, just to this stage. There's some really beautiful things going on. We're just going to work on a couple things. I was remembering my own first performance of this, and the fugue itself is supposed to be about 8 minutes. And I remember there's a couple places where you can loop back around over and over. So my first performance was about 22 minutes. And I think actually Professor Galaganov might have been there. My teacher kept yelling, "Keep going," because she just wanted me to figure out how to get around it. So bravo on so many things. I want to tackle, see what we have time for, but I want to tackle one thing in each part of it. And the first thing that I wanted to tackle in the Adagio is thinking more about the space that you're in and the type of sound or character that you really want us to feel. I'm wondering, have you thought about what kind of character you want the Adagio to have? Kind of sad, yeah? Anything else in there? What kind of sad would it be? When I think about types of sad, I think, well, I could be sad that I'm not able to stay up late, or that I'm not getting my video game time, or I could be sad that my dog has run away, or I could be sad because I'm missing somebody that's in my life, and I'm going to see them tomorrow. But different types of sad. Is there a particular one that you think about?
I don't really know.
Don't really know. That's okay. Well, in terms of the space, are you listening? My sense is you're listening here, which is we do have to keep track of that all the time. But have you ever thought about throwing your ear off to like the corner of these rooms here, up there and up there, and to think about filling that space with your sound? I want you to try it one more time. Think about that sadness. Let's see. I'm just going to give another chance to start it as well. Yeah. Great, you're starting to get the handle of it. Now, when I think about our bow arm, one of the things that will help actually fill that space is how we drop weight into the instrument itself, right? And so if I'm pushing weight into the instrument, then the sound is going into the instrument. But if I'm dropping and pulling that sound out, then that sound is going to travel out to everybody over here. Now, you notice how each one of these rolls has a slightly different balance to what's being asked. And what I would do when you're at home and have a little bit more time to practice on it, we won't do it with each one here so we can keep moving, but take each one of those chords and break them up like we just did, so that you're used to, that you figure out how each one of those chords, you can pull that type of sound out of it. Does that make sense? And then from there, you figure out how you get in and out of it. That then starts to bring up this type of resonance. You can get any character, but yet everybody inside of the hall can then hear you. And one of the famous Dorothy DeLay sayings was, "It's beautiful, sweetie, but sugar plum, if I can't hear you, it doesn't mean anything." So we need to always be thinking about how that sound is going to project. Now, I want you to try it one last time, and then we'll go in. I'm just checking our time. Then we'll go into the fugue, but now add in that sad character. So if I'm sad, is the roll fast or slow? It's probably a little slower, right? And then if I hang on to something, we probably also don't want any quick motion to happen through any of these runs. Do that all, but keep the most important thing is going to be your sound, because that sound is the thing that we actually are going to relate to. You want to try it one last time? Good, good. How does that feel to you? Does it feel better? Do you like it? Part of that will just be continuing to look for it. And I'm already hearing you adjust the different things, so I'm going to let you play with that a little bit and go into a little bit of something that I think will help a lot with the fugue. So in the fugue, one of the challenges is with all these chords, what we can end up having a lot of is yum bum bum beam ba ba beam bum 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 beam bum bum. And if that repetition continues too frequently, then we start to not enjoy the fugue as much. One of the things then we have to always be thinking about is how are we going to shape that motive and how does it play out in the long line? So I'm wondering, can we first work on the first? And I'm wondering, where in there, I see an arrow in your part. So are you shaping to there? So just play that much, and I just want you to actually make sure we're clear on where you're shaping that one. Good, yeah, play the whole motive. Good. Now, one of the trickier parts of this Bach is that we have to do so much with our bow. So I'm just going to hold your violin still. Do you notice that you're doing a lot with both your violin and your bow? So let me just hold it once, and I'm going to force you to do it with your bow. Go ahead. Good. So in order for that to work with our bow, we probably have to use a little bit of bow, a little bit more, a little bit more, most, and then back it off. Does that make sense? You want to try that? Yeah. Good. Good. And I'm wondering, can we try it just a little higher up, see what it feels like to you? It might not feel good. We'll see what it sounds like. Good. Now, you can decide where to do it with the bow, even with the amount of chords that are coming up. A lot of them were happening at the frog, and I'm going to push you to do them in different parts of the bow. Doesn't mean that's exactly where you'll do them. Part of it is to move you out of your comfort zone so that we can get different types of rolls and articulation to keep phrasing. Now, we're going to work on that just a little bit longer. So the other thing is we probably want to keep the articulation, so the beginning of the note and the end of the note, fairly similar, at least within the same family. So if it gets too far outside of that, then we're maybe going more into a romantic period, right? So be careful that the bum, 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 beam, ba, ba, beam, bum, bum stays intact. Can you sing it for me once? Can we sing it together? Why don't we sing it together, and then I'll see if we need to see it alone. Ready? And one. Bum, 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 ba, ba, beam, bum, bum. One more time. And one. Bum, 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 ba, ba, beam, bum, bum. Good. Now play that. Good. With the attack, I feel the attack coming from these two fingers. Let's just try that. We just do that bow stroke. Good. So, there you go. And let the end of the note ring. Yeah? Good. That's getting there. And you feel that same contact with the string. As soon as I put my bow or my finger there, you drop just a little bit. And I want to encourage you to keep doing that. Now we have to keep that articulation and increase the amount of bow to get the leadership of the phrase out. Good. Now, this next one, when it comes in, do you want the same phrasing to it? So is it... Is that what you're thinking? Yeah. So... Is that right? So now let's try that one. First play just the motive. Make sure we've got that. Good. And let's try it one more time. You back off a lot here. And I would keep that up. That's the right idea. Now let's add in the double stop. Good. Now as we add these double stops, what we want to look for is the same thing that we were talking about with the amount of bow, in terms of also affecting the amount of attack or the amount of sustain that we might give it. So if we're aiming towards this one, that one probably should have the most attack. Would you agree with that? And probably be just a little bit longer than the others. So that means then that one we're just going to be gentle with. Oh, it's the first double stop. And then this last one here, the third one, we're going to back a little bit off, and that will leave us room for this next one. You want to try that? Good. And then we want to think about context. So this is just the very opening. So in terms of how attacked the one where we're going to is, we probably want to keep it pretty simple because we're going to have some much bigger ones later, right? So I would back that off just a little bit. Gonna try? That's the right idea. Now let's put them together. So good. Does that sound different to you? Does it feel different how you're playing it as well? Because part of it, because there's so many of these, and also to help the memory and the trajectory, identifying how it feels in the hand, where you're actually getting these differences from to pull out the shaping, then preserves other types of feelings for later in the movement, but also really helps you identify it. Now, when we put those two together, it does start to kind of circle around in terms of its shaping, right? So what we might want to do, we'll do the next one and add in a 3-note chord, but start already thinking, should they all shape the same, or does that actually get us into too much of a circle again, right? Does that make sense? So if we're always shaping, then that's going to become its own repetitive problem. Now, let's do this one. I see another arrow there, so should we shape it to there? Let's just do that and use the same technique you have. Good. Do it one more time. I'm going to hold your violin. It's challenging to just do it with the bow, right? One of the practice techniques sometimes you can use is do you have a brother or a sister or a mom or a dad who can actually come and hold that for you? Sometimes I used to put it against a wall. If you take a piece of cloth, actually just set it against the wall. That's a little uncomfortable, I will admit that, but that forces you into just identifying this. Let's do it one last time, and let's actually time together. And just play that. Good. Now, when you're listening to those, we're going to add in the double stops in a second. Does the character change for each one of them? So this first one versus this one. How would you say the difference of the characters between the two?
First one's like more happy, and the second one's like more heroic.
More heroic. So the first one's more happy. The second one's more heroic. And then what about? Happy again? And is it as happy as the first one, or more happy, or less happy?
More happy.
More happy. So let's do a little happy here, heroic, and then even more happy, still with the same motive. Heroic. More happy. Good. And the last one, I think you could do even more. And you start to hear how now, even though we're going to the same place, those character switches start to actually create a longer line for us and for you. And it gives you a more definitive thing to focus on. Let's tackle these 3-note chords now. And let's just hear. So if that's where you're going, again, that's the one we're going to want the most articulation and the broadest stroke on. If we do too much attack on this first one, then that's going to take us away from that line. You want to just try from there? Good. So let's do it a little slowly. And actually roll that one. Just to hear them. Good. Now with the roll, and this is something I know we're getting a little bit onto our time, but we'll try and wrap this up in just a couple minutes. With a roll, if we have 3 notes, how many different ways can we roll them? So if we just take, we have that, we can roll 2 and 2, right? What else can we do? 2 and 1. 2 and 1? Yeah, what else? 1 and 2. 1 and 2? Yeah, anything else? Can we do 1, 1, 1? Yeah, and can we do them all at once? So we have those options to choose from in terms of how that might help our shaping. So if we take the one that we're going to, the big one, how do you want to roll that one? If it's happy, does this sound happy? Probably not. That's a little more angry. What about 2 and 1? That could work, or 1 and 2. I kind of like the 2 and 1 better. And what about the roll? You like the roll? So then if that's our big one, maybe we should roll a little bit on the first one, roll more on the second one, and then we can back it up. Does that make sense? Now, saying that is one thing, and then doing it is a whole other thing. So let's do it 3 times, and we'll just let you try it out. Good. I'll try it again. Yeah, better. And the third one? That's the right idea. And it's practicing and actually letting yourself explore those. With that last one, the other thing with a chord is we often think we have to go to the frog. So can you try it once? This is going to be very awkward. You try it actually at the tip. And you hear a different sound to that? Do it one more time. Yeah, and now go back to the middle of the bow where you were doing it. Good, and what I like now is just in that little exercise, you're articulating the beginning of each one of these slightly differently, even though we've taken you back to where you are. So those are some practice techniques then in order to ask questions that are going to feed you on stage. Let's put it all together before we end. And that way we test out the individual one, and we test out the 2 double stop, and we test out the 3 double stop. The one we didn't get to is, of course, the 4 double stop, which has its own same unique situations, just with 4 strings instead of 3. So I want you to think about projecting out and how you shape, how you're using the bow and the attack. All right, go for it. And now happy. Oh. Yeah. Does that sound different to you? What I'm hearing out here is now I've got a longer line, which would be the last thing I would fit in. And we've been taking care of that, even though we haven't been talking about it. So that's what I hear you starting to do. What that gives me then is now, instead of me just hearing all of the vertical lineup, I'm actually getting the horizontal line and the character out of it, and the sound is projecting. And for me as a listener, I'm always thinking about, well, what is the audience? What would I think about if a violinist came out and played this to me? What are the things that I'd want to follow? Or what kinds of things should I be interested in for them? And it would be lining up those types of things. Does that all make sense?
Yeah.
Is that helpful?
Mhm.
Thank you so much. Beautiful job. Wonderful to hear you play, and I look forward to hearing this again sometime.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. Yeah. Beautiful. Is there a question there? Looks like a question.
Tell us about your violin. It has such a lovely tone.
Oh, thank you. This, so for many years, I played an old Italian violin, this violin, I knew coming up, it was joint owned by two people, and I knew that it was going to need to be sold. And so I had, fortunately, 2 years to figure out what my next situation was going to be. And I had some very close friends who all owned beautiful old Italian instruments recommend that I look at some modern violin makers because all of them also owned modern violins, and indeed many of them, even though they had these old Italian instruments, played their modern instruments more. And so I went on a search and played about 35 different modern violin makers, and I ran across, ironically, a couple, Peter and Wendy Moose, who had made the viola of the violist in the Miró Quartet, Mai Montebucci, and I had played many of their violas, but they had made a switch in their violins, and so this is a violin I commissioned from them in 2011, and yeah, it's still underage, but it's a wonderful violin. It was completely new for me to play a brand new violin, and I kept under your ear, the quartet, I would keep asking, it sounds like a cigar box under my ear. Are you sure it's okay? They'd be like, no, it sounds great. But there's a lot of breaking in. And for me, I played it right from the moment I got it every single day. And it took about 1.5 years before I was feeling comfortable and good about it. And we underwent 2 bridges and 4 or 5 sound posts within that first 1.5 years, because the instrument itself is adjusting so much. And with the travel that we do, that also was having a lot of really great impact on it. But I've loved it. I'm always amazed. I get so many wonderful comments about the instrument itself. I also play, this is an old bow of mine. It's just a gold-mounted Fretschner, which was actually broken. It broke in a performance. And I had a gentleman repair it, Arnold Bone, who's since passed, but he was an inventor, and he had invented, when we buy clothes, the little plastic loops that attach the price tag. He invented that. So he had a wealth of money, and he loved bows and guns, and so he had studied bow craftsmanship and actually repaired it. And the special thing I love about this bow is that he had gotten glue from NASA. And so it's glued with the same glue that the space shuttle uses. I always feel very special about that. But I also have 2 modern bows that I often play, one by Mr. Kainstrom and one by Mr. Espy, both of who live in Port Townsend in Washington, both American makers, and they're wonderful. Yeah. Yeah. Any other questions? Yes? Oh, how many hours do I practice a day? There's the question of the hour. So I spend every day, usually the quartet when we're together. So today before I drove up here, we rehearsed for 3 hours. And our quartet, every quartet is different, just like we talked about with the second violin switching. We are big rehearsers, and we believe that something every day is better than a lot in one day. And I take that same approach to my own playing. So this morning I was lucky. I got to get up and practice for an hour on my own, and then I had quartet rehearsal for 3 hours, and I'm going to have a lovely dinner this evening, and I might practice a little bit more tonight. But every day, sometimes I'm teaching, sometimes I'll be on the instrument 8 to 10 hours a day, and I'm not always playing or practicing. But if there's a day where we have a long travel day, I always make sure I'm on it for like 30 to 40 minutes. So sometimes you'll find me in a hotel room with a big heavy mute on at midnight, just playing just a little bit, because that little bit, that consistency every day makes the biggest impact on my life and on what I get to do on the instrument every day. And then I would look for guidance from how you feel you're playing and what your parents or your teachers or your mentors and your colleagues around you are saying, because that then will inspire you to practice more or feel like you're actually doing just about right for what you want to accomplish. Yeah, it's a great question. Yeah, and there was another one over here. Yeah.
I was going to ask, there are so many great recordings of the Chaconne.
Oh, yeah.
And are there any that are particularly special to you? And also, do you recommend particular recordings to students to listen to?
Oh, yeah. Okay, wow. There's a bunch of questions in there. I love them all. The Chaconne for me was a huge piece of my life when I was younger, and I think it is for almost all of us once you get to know it, isn't it? I grew up with records and going to the library and hearing whatever was in the library. And I'm so grateful because this teacher that I talked about earlier, Joan Barrett, she gave me a record of Milstein, who she had known, and Schering. And at different points, I listened to both of them. Those were, of course, our standard recordings for so many years. And when I then got to go to college, these CDs had been popping up for a while, and you could go to Tower Records in Houston and just listen for hours, and Rice started to have more recordings. So I listened to anything and everything that I could. I still come back to those two recordings. Another recording that's very close to my heart is that of my own teacher, Miriam Fried, who's recorded them now 2 or 3 times, which is incredible. I haven't heard her very latest, but the second recording that she did was one that she did while I was studying with her. And so we would have these, I studied the Chaconne with her, and she would say, "Oh, why are you doing that? Think about this." And then she would play the whole Chaconne, and you'd just be sitting there, and you would learn so much from being that close to somebody who's so intimate with them. As far as my own students and recordings, I encourage it as much as possible, because it's such a wealth of information. But again, with each student, it's very unique and individual. So sometimes that information can be overload. So for some personalities, I find it much more effective to make sure and help them form their own concepts before allowing that information in. And for others, sometimes actually having that information come in is the more inspiring turn to take. And so it's that balance between what is the goal that the student has, what is the goal that you're hoping for the student, and what are the best tools to use in finding the path to that. And for every student, that's going to be very unique and individual. I find this happened to me 3 or 4 years ago, because I'm not that old, but I'm at that age where there's technology. Now I'm understanding why my dad was like, "Just fix this for me." But I was in a lesson, and we use the mirror so much because that's an instant feedback. And we were struggling finding the right way, and the student turned to me and said, "Well, don't you have a phone?" And I said, "Yeah, but what is that going to do?" She said, "Well, videotape me." And I was like, "Oh!" And that just blew my mind. And from that point forward, now I'm like, just do it again, I'll videotape it. And then we can actually talk through, the video. And when I was a student, I remember saving up the $600 to buy the Sony tape recorder so that you could just have sound and listen to it afterwards. And now it's so instant. So another big thing that I encourage a lot in my students is putting are you struggling with something? Do you not know how it sounds? Are you stuck and you don't know what to do? Or you're just like, blah? Put the phone, press record, play something, and listen to it. And from that action alone, in 30 seconds or 2 minutes, you can garner the information that you need to then go work on. And it changes your practicing instantly. And I use that for myself sometimes. Instead of getting the feedback from the quartet, which I love, I can actually then hear more of what they might be talking about or more of what I want by just turning on the phone It's amazing to use that technology. Yeah. Thank you all. Thank you so much, Ocean, and thank you, Gary, and the Chamber Music Society. It's been a wonderful experience for me, and I hope for all of you, and I'll look forward to sharing the concert tomorrow with all of you. All right. Okay.